7HZ is a name very well known, especially for the last 2 years. They have been releasing quite a number of IEM, which was highly popular. And this year, one of the major releases is this 7HZ Aurora here, priced at 399 US dollar, as you can see here in Linsoul Audio. Inside this box, what you're gonna get is, of course, the IEM itself here. Okay, and it comes with this selection of silicon tips, which is unique to 7HZ, and it offers 3 different sizes. And it seems to me like there's also medium bore and narrow bore, okay, with this carrying case here, okay, and this very nice looking, fatty, healthy looking modular copper cable, which is a single crystal copper, and it is of course detachable with 0.78 2-pin connection here, which is already attached. And as you would notice here, let's just have a closer look at this Aurora itself from the physical side. Okay, so this is pretty much a normal thing right now that you can see quite a lot, constructed of hard resin. And let's just talk about comfort and the ergonomic itself. You see here, this Aurora is pretty much simple to wear, despite the seemingly larger than normal size, in order to accommodate 3 different type of driver inside. Okay, it is so very easy to wear, like this. So definitely very comfortable. I was able to wear this Aurora continuously for 3 hours. And like I mentioned, despite the size being slightly bigger than normal IM, I will admit that it is, I do not feel any kind of discomfort or any element of fatigue even after 3 hours. So on the wear factor, ergonomic, this is already a very good IM. Okay, now let's talk about what's inside. What we're going to find inside is a combination of a triple hybrid drivers. Okay, as you can see here, the first one being a dynamic driver, which is 12mm, and 2 balanced armature, and 6mm magnetic planar, which I believe serve as the upper frequency driver. And the impedance rating is rated at 32 ohm with this modular detachable cable here. Okay, easy to detach and easy to attach, and in L configuration. Driving this 7HZ Aurora is a simple affair, okay? Despite being rated at 32 ohm, which is relatively slightly kind of a bit on the higher side, comparing with the normal standard nowadays, I was able to use this Aurora straight out of the box with this phone of mine, which is Sony Xperia 1 Mark IV, not a very powerful source. Okay, the sound itself already sounding full and engaging. And of course, for the most part, I spend quite a lot on listening to this Aurora from my dongle here, which is EPZ TP50, 50mm. No, 4.4mm balance, okay? And also this FEO KA17 here. And of course, most recently, I have spent quite a lot of time listening to this Aurora using this Moondrop Miat 01, okay? So let's just talk about some of the sound aspect. The sound presentation of this Aurora is something which I would consider as very technical, okay? So, and let's talk about the dynamic presentation itself, the tuning itself. It hovers somewhere between being V sound curve to U sound curve, because the way when I listen to it, I can clearly hear that there's a strong suppression of the mid-range and a lot of focus, especially on the lower frequency and also in the upper frequency. And when we talk about lower frequency, this thing is definitely, based on my perspective, I would classify as a bass head IM, okay? Because the dominance of the lower frequency, you just can't miss it. That is probably one of the first thing that you would hear the moment you listen to this Aurora, especially if you use the narrow bore tip. So there's a huge emphasis of mid bass all the way to the sub bass, and it is, represented by something which I consider as very fast, very technical sort of sound presentation, okay? With the mid bass offering the kind of slam, impact, and presence which is strong, okay? And it is definitely suitable for certain type of music like electronic music, rock, metal music, but perhaps not so suitable for something which require a bit more of transparency. For example, when I subject this Aurora listening to certain type of technical jazz or even instrumental or even classical music, this is definitely not suitable for that kind that sort of music because there's too many coloration in the low frequency. It lack transparency, it lack the sort of natural realism to the sound itself when the low frequency, but it is definitely exciting, engaging, and very vibrant. Energetic, again, the keyword here is energetic and technically competent. The separation of the sub bass and the mid bass itself is quite succinct. Okay, you can clearly hear that how the mid bass dominate, and then followed by the strong presence of the sub bass itself decaying into the lowest frequency. So if being technical on the lower frequency is what you are looking after and you love big bass, this is it. Okay, and let's just have a look at the mid range itself. Now, perhaps one of the key thing that I would like to mention on the most foremost for this 7HZ Aurora is that the good thing is that it is transparent. I do not hear any kind of coloration when it comes to the mid-range. The instrument sounded accurate to my ears to a point that I would even consider that it is suitable for certain type of, music when it involves a lot of string percussion if you just focus on the mid-range, but not so much on the lower frequency like I mentioned earlier. So, but the key thing is that because of the general tuning being a V and, sometimes depending on what music that you're listening to, it can be like U curve. So I can feel that the presence of the mid-range is kind of like, not as frontal as how I would prefer it. Okay. Because if there is a strong presence of bass in the recording or even the treble in the recording, then you would hear that the mid-range itself kind of a bit subdued. All right. So that's pretty much on the mid-range itself. And the treble, the upper frequency. Okay. This is another IM which I would consider as suitable for people who love highly technical upper frequency, anyway from upper mid-range or to the treble decays. But my biggest issue with this Aurora is that when I spend some time listening to it, to a certain type of music genre, again, those which involve quite a lot of percussion and instrument, okay, with, involve a lot of hi-hat and cymbals, I can audibly hear that the tonality and the timbre for that particular segment between upper mid-range all the way to the treble sounded kind of a bit metallic, okay? Sound kind of a bit digital sounding. It lacked that organic smoothness sense to it. It doesn't sound as realistic as how I prefer it. It's more like the kind of sound that you would hear from direct from a studio rendering, okay, rather than, realistic kind of sound presentation. But it is definitely very technical. You can clearly hear, different level of treble as how it disperses all the way to the furthest extension of the treble itself. So the extension is good on the upper frequency, depending on what source you use, especially something like this KA17 or even this TP50. But also depending on the kind of source that you have, okay, it sounded quite a bit more metallic and kind of a bit more digital sounding if you use something like KA17 here, because this one is already very technically competent. The dynamism exhibited by this KA17 kind of a bit emphasize that element even more on the technical aspect of it, but I do get a bit more of, toned down, rather than being too much technical, a bit of sense of being musical when I use TP50 or even this Moondrop Miat 01 here. So I would even say that if I want to be analytical, I would probably pair this Aurora with this KA17, and if I want it to be a bit more well balanced, okay, not too digital sounding, I would use this TP50 or even this Miat 01 here. I already mentioned that this thing is analytical, technically competent, so no issues there with separation and layering. You can clearly hear different level of, instrument or even different frequency of the sound itself as presented by the recording. The more resolving it is, the more detail you're going to get, macro and micro detail. But when it comes to the sound stage itself, it is kind of a bit circular because this thing being a hybrid. So you can expect very good holographic spatial projection, suitable for gaming, suitable for any kind of movie watching, binaural music, and kind of a bit when it comes to Philharmonic Orchestra, the soundstage doesn't sound as open, but at least it is tall and circular. This is how it looked like 7HZ Aurora compared against some of the competition, which I have personally tested. This is not all of them, obviously. I'm providing as much as possible, whichever that I can fit into this particular screen. So with a total score of 79, I think this Aurora suffer a bit on the element of tone and timbre, note weight and density. And also I think the mid-range performance itself and also the treble performance. But overall, the key X factor for this Aurora is technical aspect. So let's just quickly have a look at some of the comparison, which is some IEM which I am very familiar. I would even say that this Aurora reminds me a lot to Eco or H10, okay, which I have tested sometime last year, right? So you can see that they're pretty much close in some area, but I will admit that when it comes to best performance and even treble performance, I strongly believe that OH10 does it better. A bit more smoother, a bit more of coherency, and a bit more of, let's say, like I say again, the keyword here is smoothness, natural realism to it. So this is kind of a bit too much focus on being technical, but then again, it also depends on your subjective preference, right? If being analytical, technical, and bassy is what you like, 7HZ Aurora is definitely the one to go for.